Today I'm sharing a watercolor tutorial for a bookmark. It's back to school season here, so I thought a bookmark would be fun. I'm using Daniel Smith watercolor tube paint, and I just put in gray titanium. Next is Indian red. I really like this color for fall. I'm using my fall color palette for the most part. And this Indian red has kind of rust undertones. It's not super bright or Christmassy looking, so it's a really nice shade of red. Next, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this properly, but it's phthalo turquoise, Phthalo turquoise. Very vibrant color. It's really, really beautiful. And then my favorite tube, surprisingly, I was trying for a mustard yellow. It's kind of hard to tell what these look like online, but I got this interference copper, and it's iridescent. It's really pretty. And then finally, a shade of green, which I've fallen in love with, is Green Apatite Genuine. All these are Daniel Smith extra fine watercolors. Got them on Amazon, and the tubes are 15 milliliters or 0.5 fluid ounces, and they're just really great shades. So I'm just going to test them out on a couple of strips here. The first strip is going to be just super pigmented, lots of paint, very little water. I just like to see my darkest shade, and then after this I'll go and check out the lightest shade that I can get or close to it. This iridescent copper, or the interference copper, is not the mustard yellow that I was looking for, but it's so pretty. It just adds so much in the form of using it for accents and just a little bit of sparkle. So I'm really happy with it. And the next one is the gray titanium, which actually kind of looks a little, when it's a lighter shade, it looks almost like a taupe or a tan or a greige. So there's actually a lot I think I can do with this shade. This is super dark here, but I'm pretty happy with it. And then I'm digging into the Indian red, which I think I'll get a lot of use out of during the non-Christmas seasons, just as a nice kind of more neutral red, I guess. It's very, very dark, and it looks really pretty when you lighten it up with some water too. Here's the turquoise, which is very, very, very bright, vibrant, and just really beautiful. So I'm just using these little tester strips as a guide just for future reference. When I go to use these for different projects and workshops, I know what my range is for these colors. So it's just real helpful when you're starting a project just to see what your paints can do. I've fallen in love with tube paint. I love how I can leave it in my palette and just, get a little bit more water and apply it, and then I have my watercolors ready to go. I don't have to throw it away or anything like that, so I just leave it until I use it all up. Generally for workshops, a lot of times I'll just rinse them out because they can get a little sloppy and confusing for my next set of students, so I always like to start with a fresh batch. But these tubes go very, very long way. Now I'm working backwards with my green and adding a lot of water. A lot of times I'll dip back into my dark shade on that first strip to see what I can play around with by adding water to it. I'm grabbing some of the turquoise now, and watch for this color. It's so pretty. Look how pretty that is. Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite color overall. So I've done a bunch of floral cards in that shade and played around with that a little bit lately, and super happy with that color. Here's the red. You can see it as it's lightened up. You'll see a little bit of that rust undertone. It's not super orangey. It's kind of like maybe more like a dirty rose, or dirty rose is probably what comes best to mind. And here's the dark gray turning into more of a taupe. You can see a little bit of brown in it. I love using this as a base color or a light base wash, and then the copper paint going down is really shimmery and very pretty. And I love it thick, I love it light and loose. Just real happy with this color palette. Next, I go ahead and line up my floss for my embroidery projects, just to see how the palette matches up for my collection. You can see the mustardy yellow and the copper are a little bit different, but I'm totally okay with that. To start your bookmark, you just cut out a rectangle shape, whatever you think you might like for your bookmark shape, it's fine. I tape it down with blue painter's tape around the edges, probably about 1/4 of an inch, all the way around, just to create a barrier. And then I put a wash over it, so I'm just dabbing into my gray titanium paint, and I'm splashing in a little bit of water here and there, trying to make it look almost like a gray fall sky with some darker areas here and there and some lighter ones. I really don't have a plan at this moment. I'm just covering the base of this bookmark, playing around with the new paint, seeing how it blends, seeing what happens when I dip into more water, how can I get a lighter and darker area going. I don't particularly like just a flat wash on my projects. I like that variation of shading and kind of an organic, more loose feel. So this is a great time to play around with your brush and your water and your paints and just get comfortable and confident. You really cannot mess this up unless you go too dark, because then it's really hard to layer your florals onto something that's super dark. So if you wanted to use the other colors, you could just go with a light wash. And next I've let it dry, so you can see that it's not shimmery at all. That tells me that my paper is dry. I waited for it to air dry, but you can lightly use a hair dryer if you want to speed the process up. I have, again, no plan. I want this to be a floral, so I'm just going to go with some teardrop petals, and I'm really not sure about the sizing that I want. I do know that I want some larger red flowers. At this point, I'm kind of thinking, maybe 3 petals, and I'm filling them in to see if I like that. This red paint seems really, really thick, so I kind of was trying to get used to figuring out if I should water it down a little bit more or leave it really saturated. I also, at times, will leave white space or light space just so it looks like there's some reflection of light. I've decided to do 5 petals on this little guy here. And as you can see, I made a larger petal than some of the other ones. So I'm going to just go back over and increase the petal size. So it's all one big experiment. And the idea is just to have a relaxing project. When our kids go back to school, we homeschool, but they always have lots of books, and it motivates me to read my own set of books and to do a study for myself. So I went to Bookmark for some great books that I got to read this fall, and I'm going with some flowers on the bookmark and then some flowers kind of that fall off to the side almost, and you'll see what this is going to look like when we take that blue painter's tape off. So what I'm doing is I'm painting even onto the tape just so I can keep spatially aware of where my petals are, and they should be, just to kind of help me with their spacing. And when we peel that off, it's going to look really, really cute. So you don't want it to be super perfect. You're just kind of, it's almost like you threw the petals up into the air and they fell down onto the bookmark, and where they landed is just organically perfect. So that's kind of what we're going for here. And usually when I do a larger flower on a project like this, I'll just do it in odd numbers. So I'll just have 1 large flower, 3 or 5. And then I like to start with a bigger floral and kind of work my way down to smaller, and then maybe even the greens, or adding some wheat, or maybe some baby's breath. And that's actually how I arrange floral arrangements too sometimes. And then sometimes I'll go in the opposite direction and start with the filler and then add the small and then the large. So just kind of what you're feeling for the day, I guess, because this is just about you finding a relaxing project. This is a useful project. Everyone needs a good bookmark, and they make great little sweet gifts for teachers or friends going back to school, or your mom. It's always a good idea, right? So I'm trying to figure out where I want these little blue turquoise flowers, and I'm leaning towards 3 petals. They're kind of like, these are loose floral, so they're not an exact flower. I lean more impressionistic than realistic, so these are more of maybe cone flowers. You're kind of looking at them on the side. So I'm just sprinkling them around, again leaving a little tiny patch of that background color shining through, just because it helps with the dimension and gives it a little bit of texture. And I'm just spreading them out and filling them in as I go. This is a teardrop shape that is easy to make, and you can use for a lot of different styles of flowers. So I'm just filling them in. You'll notice I pull from another flower in this one. That's because I've got too much paint. And I want it to be the lighter turquoise than that really deep pigmented one. So I'm grabbing into that every now and then, and that's perfectly fine to do. If I wanted to take that off, I could just scoop it up and then put it on a towel if I felt like I had too much pigment. Or I can just add it to another flower. And that just comes with practice and trying to figure out what your style is and what you like. At this point, speaking of I do not like this project. I think my bookmark is looking hideous. I'm struggling with the roundness of these teardrop petals, and I'm really considering trashing it and starting over and maybe drawing the project out first. The idea was that these would be so easy that anyone can pick up the materials and watch this video and start painting, and that's still the idea. So I don't want I just want to kind of sit down and paint for the joy of painting. I don't want it to be super precise. I want it to be a little bit more organic. So the idea is, I think of the project, this was a bookmark, and then I just kind of go with what I'm feeling or what's inspiring or what the paint's doing. So I'm having a little regret here, thinking this is not going to turn out okay. This is the first time I've painted with the set of tubes in this color palette, and I'm not convinced that I like them together. And I have all this floss as well, so I'm panicking a little bit about my choice of colors. This palette looked beautiful on I think it was a photograph that I grabbed off of Pinterest to get these colors, and I created some Procreate designs that I really liked. So I've decided to just persevere and keep layering and keep adding colors, and just to see what we end up with here. At this point, I'm like, okay, I have too much round happening. All these petals are round, so I'm going to go in with some finer lines and put in some little sheaves of wheat. I start with some thicker lines for the little bundles of wheat, and then you'll see here in a little bit I'll practice some finer lines. I actually like the finer lines the best, but in the end I liked that some were thick and some were fine. So it's just preference, and it's just having fun playing around with the paint, just relaxing, making something that you can use, and increasing your skill in painting. No one's judging. I mean, maybe you are now, that's fine. I think you'll see a difference between where this painting is now and at the very end. I was quite happy when I took off the blue paint strips. So I'm liking this more and more. I'm just kind of filling in, and these are going off the page or off the bookmark. I'm painting onto that blue strip because that will go away and it'll leave a crisp white line around the edging. You can see the lighter strokes here. They look a little bit more natural, a little bit more wispy, and I kind of get better as I go along here. But this stroke here, these little bundles of wheat, could also become, if I use the green pine branches, so for Christmas season or winter season, you could use this technique here for pine branches or even a pine tree. So it's pretty versatile little technique here. I've started to turn my paper. Sometimes I'll get so embedded in a project that I will forget that I can turn my project around just to get a better vantage point, different perspective. So be sure to play around with moving your project around. That helps to keep your hands out of the paint as well. So this is the fun part, or at least one of the fun parts. I'm figuring out what shade of green I want, and then I'm going to do my favorite stem leaf combination, which is just a light tip stem going down. It's pretty thin, and then my favorite leaf is a light to thick leaf. And so I'm just gently brushing just the very tip of my paintbrush onto the paper for that leaf, and then I press all the bristles down and then pull them gently back into the stem. And I could do this part all day. This stroke is so relaxing for me. And that green adds a bit of dimension and a little bit more color. And you can see that red with that green does not look Christmassy at all. It's very fall, a little bit dark and moody kind of, I suppose. By painting this little leaf darker, it kind of comes to the forefront here. And then when I go back into my turquoise flowers, I decided to go ahead and do the little tops on these guys. And with this copper paint, I realized I need more pigment and less water. If I put water on it, it kind of bled a little bit. So I kind of like, when I use this, and I love using this color, kind of more globular taking of the paint. So I've got a lot of heavy pigment, and it dries really, really pretty. This is pretty on as an accent too. And then a lot of times I'll go over it twice, just because as it lightens up, it doesn't sparkle quite as much. So feel free to go over that a couple different times if you need to. But super happy with how that added a little pizzazz to these little cone flowers. I'm going back in with just a light stroke stem, and then the leaf is also, it's more like a grassy leaf, just kind of wispy. I don't have tons of open space here, so I didn't want any any other kind of leaf other than more of a grass looking leaf. And so I just start super light. You can always go thicker, but you can never really take it away, take enough pigment away to make it look thinner. So I always start as thin as I can get it, and some days my hand is more steady than other days. And so I love pulling in these little grass looking leaves. I like making them taller than some of the flowers and shorter than some of the flowers. And these flowers are just kind of hanging out in the space of this bookmark. They're not bundled together in a bouquet. Again, it's just kind of like you dropped a bunch of wildflowers down, and this is how they landed. And there's something whimsical about that, and I like that. I love adding a little bit of whimsy here and there. I'm just going to go over this little wheat branch there. It's kind of in my way, but I like the layered look. So don't be afraid to do that, especially if your paint is darker. It'll look nice. Then I'm finishing up this final cone flower with my last grassy looking leaf stem there. And I feel at this moment that I need a little bit more of this copper pizzazz here and there, just in some of the more negative space. Again, no plan. I'm putting them in like little balls of 3 or little berries, little clusters of berries in 3. This does not represent any specific flower or berry type. I'm just kind of in the mood to experiment, and decided also to dab some little centers into these flowers to give them a little bit more dimension. And I think this copper with the red goes really well. It's very autumn-like, and I'm dabbing a little bit on the sides here off my paper, going back over my little berries of 3 just to give them some dimension, and I like it. So I'm rinsing my brush, I'm putting it down. You've got to stop at some point. Sometimes you can overdo it. So just let that dry, and then you can have an opportunity to peel back the blue tape and enjoy your project coming to life. This has got to be the favorite part of everyone, just to see how crisp it looks and how pretty. And sometimes the watercolor paper comes off with the tape. It just happens. So I'll press it down with my finger, or scratch off a layer with my fingernail, and it's fine. So if that happens to you, don't worry. You can just smooth it out. Sometimes I'll dab a little bit of water on it. Be sure not to put water on your project. And then I'm just going to hole punch. Got to figure out which way I want to go here, where I think the top should be. And then I'm going to poke a hole through. This is smaller than a standard hole punch. I like this size for bookmarks. I'm going to use a creamy white satiny ribbon, about 6 inches. I cut it to a point so that I can stick it through that smaller hole punch. It's still a little bit tricky, and it's going to fray my ribbon a little bit. That's okay. I'll go ahead and pull it through, and after I knot it again, I can clean that up and make those edges crisp. So I don't like a super long ribbon on my bookmarks. I like one that's kind of shorter, where it sticks up through the pages so that I can see where my spot is, and it's just a pretty little ribbon accent. But you could cut your ribbon to whatever length that you like, and you could write a note or a poem or a Bible verse on the back of this and make a bunch of them and give them away. So we're almost done here, just clipping the tips, and make sure your project is dry before you do this part. See you next time.